Hello, everyone. Greetings from Brazil. This is Rodrigo Sawaia, CEO of the Brazilian Photovoltaic Solar Energy Association, also co-chairman of the Global Solar Council, the GSC. I want to welcome you back to our Global Solar Council Virtual Forum 2021 that is discussing the importance of leaving no one behind in the race to decarbonize and how solar photovoltaics is powering a brighter future in all continents. We are starting a new session about powering a bright future and how solar is making a difference and helping a green recovery reality and enabling opportunities for sustainable development. So before we start, let me bring you a brief introduction about the topic. Solar PV, solar photovoltaics, offers a unique opportunity to power a green recovery, to accelerate decarbonization trajectories and enable much needed progress towards the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, locally, but also globally, from single households, small businesses, all the way up to industrial sectors and large-scale power plants. Investing in solar brings benefits for people, for prosperity, and for the planet, thanks to a ripple effect that fans out to employment, to health, to gender equality, to poverty alleviation, vital aspects for a just transition in developing countries. This is why solar power is a key technology for making sure no one is left behind in the race, global race, to decarbonize. No one community, no single country or continent can do this alone. So we need to join hands and join efforts to reach this goal. And today in our panel discussion, we have interesting participants, very distinguished guests who bring us ideas about political actions towards 100% renewable energy and climate protection, sustainable value chain development, job creations, and other important topics that are related with this discussion. So I would like to welcome to our digital forum here the following participants who are part of our debate today. First, Stefan Singer, Senior Climate Science and Global Energy Policy Advisor from the Climate Action Network International, CAN. Also, Professor Suleiman Sari, Secretary General of the Asian Photovoltaic Industry Association, APVIA. Steve Bloom, President of the Smart Energy Council from Australia. Jennifer Mcintosh, Executive Secretary from the International Solar Energy Society, ISAS. And Michele Governatori, Coordinator of the Scientific Committee of the Worldwide Carbon Prize. So welcome you all to our event today. A pleasure to have you with us and an honor. First to start, I'll share a brief presentation with a few highlights about this topic and how solar is already making a difference. I'll do this very briefly so we have more time for the debate. Please, if someone can just let me know if the presentation is visible. Okay, so let's start. First of all, let me mention that apart from co-chair of the Global Solar Council, I act as CEO of the Brazilian Photovoltaic Solar Energy Association, a national voice of the solar sector in Brazil that represents and promotes solar PV in the country, monitors the development of the market, and serves as a meeting ground and a hub for the sector to move forward. Well, we are talking about a transformation on the 21st century, and I can mention three important drivers of this transformation. The decentralization of electricity and energy generation, where consumers are ever more empowered with new technologies, with demand management, with energy efficiency, generating their own electricity locally. And this also supports freedom of choice and reduces costs for the users. There is also an international effort of decarbonization that we have already briefly mentioned in the opening, and an effort of digitalization with more technologies and information technologies and Internet of Things being incorporated through data collection and sharing, improved management of connected assets, and supporting the integration of variable renewable sources into the electricity matrices. So this new role is also being followed by several targets that are being highlighted by countries and also subnationally by states, by municipalities, to reach 100% renewable electricity, and also to reach, in many cases, as in cases of city, renewable energy targets on a more broader area, not only power, electricity, but also energy in general, with heating, with transportation sector, industrial sector being considered. Today, more than 1 billion people already live in cities with renewable energy targets or policies, and they are spread throughout the whole world. So this number already corresponds to 834 cities around the world, according to report from REN21 Global Status Report from recently, from 2021. And these numbers are moving forward and increasing month after month. This transformation will also lead to a different structure of our electricity sector that in the past was based on fossil fuel technologies. We could say this was the 20th century main development of the energy market with fossil fuel technologies. But the expectation is that within this century, in the following years, up to 2050, for example, such as the NVGL reports in its energy transition outlook, the participation of renewable energy technologies such as solar PV, wind, biomass, also hydropower contributing significantly, will be increasing as a majority share of the energy and the renewable electricity, but also a reduction on the use of carbon generating and emitting technologies throughout the world. So this is the background of our discussion. And why is solar PV such an interesting opportunity in this environment? The technology was able to reduce its price by more than 250 times between 1970 and 2020, now 2021. So there is a strong price reduction of this technology that makes it cost competitive today. And I would say in many parts of the world, the cheapest electricity source available for countries. We have seen different waves of incorporating solar technology in the world. First, a wave led by European countries with the support of policies, then a strong wave from Asian countries, a third wave from the Americas, the American continent, and now a growing use of this technology also in the Middle East, in Africa, and other parts of the world. So much so that in 2020, the increase of the total cumulative installed capacity was to a total of 760 gigawatts, an increase of 133 gigawatts despite the pandemic. And with this now, solar energy has already surpassed the total installed capacity of other renewable energy sources that started earlier its development, such as wind power. So this trajectory is moving forward. We see also a strong support that solar energy can bring in creating new jobs. Today, it's already responsible for a third of all renewable jobs in the world, although it's not yet the highest electricity producing technology between renewable energy sources. Important to say, the majority of these jobs are locally produced because they have to do with the installation and operation of systems. Also, logistics and sales and distribution, that is done locally. But also an important opportunity for new manufacturing, new value chains, and developing new technologies in specific areas of the world. I'll give you a very brief example of Brazil to show how this change is taking place in our country. In 2017, Brazil was the 26th country in the world with the highest investments, accumulated investments in solar energy. With policies that were brought into place, the country was able to move up 10 points, 10 positions in this global ranking in a few years. Now, in 2019, Brazil was already the 16th largest investor in the world in renewable energy, in solar energy power, in accumulated capacity. And soon enough, we have the numbers consolidated from last year, when Brazil was number 9 in the world in terms of added installed capacity. So the country is moving up in this evolution of PV use in the world. And as a result of policies in the country, solar energy has become, since 2019, the cheapest electricity source in Brazil. So this shows for a new paradigm to the country, where adding new generation capacity with solar becomes the best option, the best choice for also reaching more competitive as a country, to reach a higher competitive level as a country. So here you can see the exponential growth of the solar technology in Brazil in 2 specific areas: large-scale projects that we call centralized generation, and also distributed generation, small-scale projects on the rooftops of buildings, and also on small land areas. 2020 was a record year for the sector despite the pandemic. And it was the first year, in fact, in which small-scale projects, so investments done by people and small companies, outperformed large-scale power plants of centralized nature. So this decentralization aspect that I mentioned is really becoming a reality in the country as well. That brought several benefits to the country so far. Brazil already has more than 48.5 billion reais of investments. This equates to approximately a little bit more than $10 billion in investments already brought to the country in solar power. Also, 275,000 jobs that were accumulated since 2012, 9.1 gigawatts of operational capacity, reducing almost 10 million tons of CO2 of emissions so far, and this number is increasing very rapidly as the technology grows, and also bringing more funds to the public sector through taxation. Almost 14 billion reais already in taxes brought to the country. Another technology that I would highlight here and might be commented during our conversation has to do with energy storage. We see the price of energy storage coming down very strongly on a very similar trajectory to what happened to solar PV, with an expectation of increase on the use of this technology also very sharply. And some countries, we have one of these countries here represented today, which is Australia, also has already incorporated large-scale and small-scale energy storage to its solar PV system. So it will be interesting to hear more about that. With this transformation, now we are reaching a tipping point where large-scale solar projects, wind projects, or hybrid projects that combine solar and wind with storage are now cheaper than fossil fuel power plants, in also generating firm and dispatchable renewable energy capacity. So overcoming the barriers of variable renewables to bring stable renewables to the board as an option for the development of our societies. Before I finish, I want to thank our 600 members at AB Solar for the support that they bring us, and also invite all of you who might be interested in developing solar projects or participating on this market in Brazil to join forces with us at AB Solar. I also wanted to thank very specially the Global Solar Council on the name of its CEO, Gianni Chianetta, and its chairman, José Donoso, for the invitation to be here with you all today. And now let's hear from our participants, our specialists on the debate. So I would like to initially share the floor with Stefan Singer, Senior Climate Science and Global Energy Policy Advisor from the Climate Action Network International. Welcome, Stefan, to our debate. and the floor is yours for your initial thoughts on the matter. Afterwards, I'll pass the floor to the other participants, but let me already present them as you're seeing their roles and their entities already on the screen. So we also have with us here today Jennifer Mcintosh, Executive Secretary from the International Solar Energy Society, ISOS, Michele Governatori, Coordinator of the Scientific Committee of the Worldwide Carbon Price Initiative, Steve Bloom, President of the Smart Energy Council from Australia, and Professor Suleiman Shari, Secretary General of the Asian Photovoltaic Industry Association. Welcome all to our debate. Stefan, let's start with you, and then I'll follow with the other participants. Welcome to our debate. Well, as
Thank you.
I'm not, okay, good. Can you hear me?
Thank you. You can hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Good. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for inviting me. Oh, there's a double sound here currently. There's a double sound, right?
Here we can hear you clearly.
Yeah, we hear it clearly. The double sign is due to the fact that probably you have open also B2Match, so you can close that one.
So what I would suggest is that you carry on with others, and I try to solve that one.
Okay, so let's move forward to the next speaker. I'll pass the floor to Professor Suleiman Shari to bring his perspectives from the Asian Photovoltaic Industry Association as its Secretary General. Welcome, Dr. Sari, Professor Sari. Thank you to be here with us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Rodrigo. It's nice to see you back here again. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, world. Hello, world. I love to see the world again. As you can see, we have a mixture of people from different backgrounds, different races, but we are one world. That's the important thing. I'd like to bring this forward and we move on from here. My background, actually, a little bit about it. I'm actually a university lecturer, but I have passion in this area because I believe that PV is a very premium way as well as a solution, a permanent solution to our energy problems, because we all know the amount of energy coming from the sun is vast, simply vast. Being a Secretary General of the association, we represent more than 300 members from the Asia region, Asia Pacific region, including Australia, actually. I'm happy to see Steve Bloom here as well. He's our strong supporter of the APVIA, and we've been working very hard together. More so of the members coming from our association who are actually manufacturers of PV modules and inverters. So most of us have the forefront technologies in terms of manufacturing, as well as there is the ingrained importance of seeing this technology being used properly. So based on the focus that we have here today, which is the political action towards 100% renewable energy, I believe we have to have a philosophy behind it. And personally and professionally, I believe that the most effective and a long-term benchmark on the success of an approach to any issue at all is the appreciation of knowledge one gathers in the journey for the quest of truth and ultimately arrive at happiness. That's the philosophy I believe I abide by. And in living with that philosophy, in coming up with strategies to arrive at the happiness. We need to have some approach, some strategic approaches. And this may appear to be somewhat conflicting sometimes, but eventually we can see that they are all interlinked. And because we have the, we must arrive at the common goals. And this has been formulated very nicely in the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, as we all know by now. Close to my heart is about education. The reason being, even though we have a lot of technologies being used, if it's not taught properly, if it's not installed properly, then the technology, no matter how good it is, it's going to fail. So I prefer to propose some sort of an approach, and I personally could like to call it the Aetc approach. Aetc approach, which I call a simple approach, where A means awareness, instilling awareness on the importance of the health of the earth, the ecosystem of the earth. And that's A. And E is education, imparting knowledge and teach the implications of the decisions we make and live with them. And the third item is training, prepare the generations with the proper skills and ways of thinking properly. And lastly, competency. We need to teach the generations to master the knowledge and the skills until rightly done. So that's why I call the Aetc approach. And going forward, I believe we, in arriving at the 100% target, we need to have a 400% effort. And we must always celebrate these ideas. We must always share this knowledge, and we must, at the end of the day, be sincere and persevere in doing all these things. That's I'd like to start with that opening statement. Back to you, Rodrigo.
Excellent, Professor. I thank you for the initial words from Professor Suleiman Shahari, Secretary General of APVIA. Now let's get back to Stefan Singer from CAN, who will share his insights as well. Welcome, Stefan.
Thank you, Rodrigo, and sorry for the technological glitches. These things happen in times of Zoom terror. Let's be honest, I think we're all facing that thing. I don't want to waste much time. I'm representing Climate Action Network International, which is arguably the largest climate ambition, climate communication, climate CSO network worldwide, which is covering all issues climate change, including clean energy, adaptation, ecosystems. We have 1,500 members, not individual members, all organizational members from regions of environmental logos, development logos. We have social justice, climate justice groups. We have academic think tanks, adaptation folks, grassroots on the ground, and folks who works with industry, just to basically describe the ecosystem I'm working in the Secretariat, being in charge of climate science and energy policy. Now, let me start with the thing of, and I thank Mr. Solarman for this fantastic philosophical upbeat to us. I think that's very important that we keep the big picture in mind, and I will try to make my comments in the same direction. The point is, how do we view, as part of the aware and caution climate community, clean energy community, how do we see the current situation? There is, and I'm going to be critical here to all of us, I'm seeing a little bit of naivety, because I believe we are very, very far away from where we need to be. Let's be very honest. I see lots of hailing. We have, again, last year, the biggest ever solar or wind capacity additions in the world, et cetera, et cetera. If you look in the context, what it means, where we stand in terms of energy and sustainable targets, SDGs, you mentioned it very correctly, my friend from Malaysia, we are far away from it. We don't have a climate crisis alone. Yes, we have a climate crisis, we have a pollution crisis, we have a health crisis, very much illustrated by the pandemic. We have a strong equity crisis, very much illustrated by the current vaccine apartheid, as we call it, what we see between the rich and the poor. We have an inequality crisis within countries, between those who do not have and those who have, who get always richer. So this climate crisis, or this implementation of renewable crisis, comes on top of it, but is also fundamental, central to solve the other issues to some extent. We have since, let's say since 2010, the same amount, the same share of fossil fuels in the system than we have today, despite the growth of renewable wind and solar. But this is only in the electricity sector. Let's be very honest. While the electricity sector now has about 29% renewables, by the way, most of them are hydropower, wind and solar, despite the strong growth in the share of all energy together, are not more than 5%. They came from zero, I know, and they had a steep growth, but they came from zero. So let's be very honest here where we stand, because electricity is only 17% of all energy use in the end. Now, the second thing is what I like to say is I like to hail and praise the IEA, the International Energy Agency, an organization we would as NGOs not necessarily praise. We had lots of debates with them. I'm a peer reviewer of the World Energy Outlook, but I think what they did was a net zero report recently was fantastic, because A, they're very important. They're the most influential energy agency in the world. They're listened to at the boardrooms of the energy community. They're listened to by the major energy ministers, and they're listened to by those guys who make decisions on investments. Right? They're not Greenpeace, they're not WWF, they're not CAN. And that's interesting what they're doing. And on top of that one, I think it's very important for us as clean energy communities, even more important. I don't think they did a report on net zero and 1.5. See, I think they did a report on how do we get this decade to significant investments into renewables, make it equitable with milestones, concrete milestones. We might not like all of them. That's a different story. But the principle, the architecture of that one is so important. If we want to meet the climate change targets as survival targets for poor communities, for fragile communities, for fragile ecosystems, then we need to take this approach into account. Early action now, and not waiting for pie in the sky, which is proposed by net zero. And as important as it is in the long term, with a balance of emissions reductions, balance emissions to come to zero, the way this is portrayed now, and we come back to that one later, I hope, is not helping. What we need now is this decade must be the decade of actions, investments in renewables, investments in energy efficiency. And I think in that context, the IEA was extremely helpful. We might not like every policy, what's in there, we might not like every technology, but the bigger picture there is very important. If you consider the IEA as one of the most important drivers of energy policy in the world. Next point for me is the issue of we cannot do renewable energy development and solar development in silos. There are other issues which are very important. You heard also in the morning session, the issues of critical minerals, in particular for batteries. We need to embark on circular economy. Recycling is very much important. We need to look into another point, which is not brought up very much, is the issue of sufficiency. It's not only energy efficiency, which is very important, sufficiency. Can we have a system in the world where we have continued economic growth, GDP growth, in particular for the OECD and the rich countries? I fully understand and fully back the need for growth for poor developing countries, for the LDCs, small island states and others, fully accept. But for the rich countries, I mean, I'm German, living in Belgium, for Europe, why do we need economic growth anymore? We need to learn to deal with what we have and change it from fossil fuels and nuclear to renewables, solar PV. And then we would also save the need to always grow the energy consumption. That's where energy efficiency comes in. And again, I'm very thankful to the IEA that they put forward a bold number and saying we need 4% energy efficiency increase every year in the next years, 4%. It's more than the SDG goals, by the way. I'm very happy to that. The other issue is financing. We need a fundamental transformation in the financial sector. And this is not just public finance, it's private finance. Let's be very honest. The IEA is saying 7 to 8 times more financing for clean energy between now and 2030, in 10 years, globally, in 10 years. That's a bold call. And I think we need to embrace that one and make sure that this is happening with legislation, with push, with pressure, with legislation on the private financial sector, because I believe the public financial sector is going that way to some extent already. I don't think I have to say more on that one. The other issue is if we talk about large-scale development of solar PV, the same is true for wind or geothermal and other technologies. We need to look into infrastructure as well. This is storage, renewable hydrogen, very important, but this is also smart metering. This is grid development, as well as smart off-grid development or mini-grid development, right? I think we need to put this in a complex, it's an ecosystem of actors and an ecosystem of technologies. It's not just installing capacities. It's just putting in place a system that works for the people with services for the people in a highly efficient, clean, and affordable way. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. Excellent contributions and points for us to reflect and debate further during our conversation here. Thank you. Now let's move forward to our next speaker, which will be Steve Bloom, President of the Smart Energy Council from Australia. Welcome, Steve. What are your insights and thoughts about these actions towards 100% renewable energy and climate protection?
Thanks, Rodrigo. Thanks to the other speakers. Though a few of you will know of me and have dealt with me, so it won't surprise you that I'm going to jump straight into the headline. The headline topic here was political action to achieve these ends. Now, interestingly, we are in a country where we are now a laggard in climate change policy at the national level, but at the state level, we have every state and territory agreed to zero by 2050, right? Now, as Stefan said, that's a slogan, that's not a policy, right? It's just a slogan. It has nothing unless you do something intelligent and fast between now. We need an 8% emissions reduction out to 2030 every year, 8%, which aligns nicely with the 8% investment in renewable energy they were talking about. But that's not enough. If we're going to reach 8% emissions reduction, then the sufficiency, the energy efficiency, and so on has to come in. Australia has a different model, and it's a curious model that some of which can be adopted. We actually have now both the population and business well ahead of governments. Even the state governments that are enthusiastic, businesses are ahead of them. So we have large businesses who are signing up to 100% renewable energy and contracts for 10 years, 15 years. We have the rooftop solar, for example. So in 2019 to 2020, in 2019, there was a 22% growth year on year in rooftop solar, which is just commercial individuals, private individuals making a decision to put PV on their roofs, right? Last year, that went up by 28%, 26%. This year, it's looking like it's running for the first quarter of this year, 2 quarters, at 30%. So in 2019, we installed 2.2 gigawatts. Last year, we installed rooftop alone. Last year, we installed 3.3 gigawatts. This year, I think it's going to be closer to 4. Now, interestingly, this is during the pandemic. This is during restrictions on mobility, non-contact installations where you're not allowed to walk into people's houses and so on. So there are a whole bunch of constraints. So from the consumer level and the public level, the switch is already turned on for parts of it. But as Stefan said, these are a narrow part of what's necessary. It's quite a narrow part. Reinforce what he said. We actually, if you have a look at the proportion of coal, fossil fuels, it's actually the same percentage, 80-odd%, as it was 30 years ago, not 10 years ago, or in 2010. We're using it the same proportion, but guess what? It's grown 30-40% since then. So there is a long, steep curve. The politics is pretty, one of the things that's happened, and it's the PV industry and wind as well for a little bit, we need to make sure it happens in terms of energy efficiency as well. The switches come on in Australia, and I think it has in many other parts of the world as well, that it's not an economic cost, it's actually an investment because they can see both the jobs and because of the costs of renewables, solar and wind especially, but solar has been unbelievable. They both follow down quite paths. In Australia now, firmed renewable energy, electricity, right? And I say energy because actually we in Australia talk about 700, 800, 1,000% renewables, right? That's what we're talking about. And the reason is because there's a simple question for much of the things we need to do in terms of emissions, it's electrify everything. Now we're fortunate, Northern Hemisphere, colder countries, different questions, different problems. So I'm not suggesting we translate what we do here to the north. But more than 65% of people live between 35 degrees north and 35 degrees south, right? So they're in a place where solar and wind and energy efficiency can work to do a whole bunch of that stuff and electrify lots of things. Now they're in the tropics, that has an impact and so on, a lot of them, but even so. So we're being driven a lot of this by Northern Hemisphere, traditional Western societies, affluent ones that Stefan was talking about, for example. That's not the majority of the world, right? And so some of the things that we're doing here, driven because it's lower cost. So if I build renewables in Australia for electricity generation, it's cheaper than a current operating coal plant, right? Not just cheaper than the new plant, including all that capital cost. It's cheaper to build new plant and run it than it is to run your existing coal plant. Now that's creating problems in the market. It's way ahead of what the electricity market is. The critical point about all this is that it's not about the facts and figures. It's not only about, I should say, it is about facts and figures, and it's about performance and cost and so on. But those rooftop PV is because people are seeing value. EVs are going to be causing the same issue, and EVs are going to be both it's a separate question. We should be moving fewer cars, better transport, different, less impactful modes, all the rest of it. But that's not going to be, we can't flick a switch on that. So EVs are way less emissions intensive than current ICE vehicles and the whole infrastructure and so on. That's driven by emotion. It's driven by people who see that they can do something good and get the services they expect and need anyway. Now, the translation of that for me is a very simple one. In most of the countries that are on this call, and certainly all the people that are on the panel, you've got a democracy. Imperfect though they might be, the real issue is votes. The currency of democracy is votes. And when you've got business and a community saying, we see jobs, we see opportunity, we don't see costs, we just see the benefits, and there are always costs for anything because doing nothing has a cost, and we know that. Now, when you have that sort of power, the real key is to help and assist in whatever the political process you're in, translate that to votes. So every time there's a conversation from a homeowner who's happy about some PV, or they've got an energy efficiency house because they put in LEDs instead of, or they put insulation in their house, or fans, whatever it happens to be, just remind them about what the conversation is they need to have with every representative, and that's from their local government right up to the national government. It doesn't matter who they are, it's got to be part of their conversation. The same applies if they want to change the health system, the education system. This is not rocket science. This is basic on the ground politics, but the currency is votes. And so our aim here, we're very active in doing a lot of behind the scenes work. But one of the things we've been able to do is to convince people that there are votes in it, and they're not going to lose votes by doing it. And particularly the business community, that's really, really valuable for them to be saying, and we have a massive push in Australia now. There's some ideological reasons why this national government probably won't change. We've got an election coming up. We missed it last time. I'm hopeful this time there's a change, and that would be earth-shattering for Australia. Both directions, actually. If the current one stays on, that's a problem, but not nearly as bad as it was before. Just to close, I've already been, I've known Suleiman for a long time, and we've worked together in APVI and so on. Those issues of training, of developing knowledge, and I'm actually working in a little program at the moment. I don't know whether it's going to come off, but we're working in some people working in Southeast Asia, again on the education, train the trainer standards, and for installation, because there's a whole lot of rooftop solar. We've got knowledge because the level we have now. We now have 13, actually as of this week, it's nearly 14.5 gigawatts of rooftop solar in Australia. Right, so we're installing about something like about 600 watts per person per day. Right, it's a lot of electricity we're putting in. Now that's causing lots of problems, but there's a knowledge base there that can be passed on and used to help other people. And the standards we've been using are pretty solid, and then a lot of them are world leading. There are two places in the world is going to have to thank for this, aside from some really good researchers at the University of New South Wales and other universities as well. One is Germany, because what Germany did 30 years ago for feed-in tariffs and whatever, And there are a bunch of reasons why they did it, not least of which the unification, and also there are all sorts of political reasons why things happen. But that allowed the PV industry to start getting to be commercialized, right? And then the second one was about 10 or 12 years ago, they went into China, and China really hit the mass scale. So those two things have just made a transformation of the industry, and that means it's a transformation of the energy system, not just the electricity system, because a whole lot of things can be electrified. I'm glad Stefan mentioned renewable hydrogen. I'll just close with two things. We're working on recycling, because there is a mass issue of what you do. I'd say repurpose and then recycle, because there are lifetimes you can use things for before you actually take them into recycle. We're doing a lot of work on that. The other thing we've created, and it's the base level that I think is fundamental. The only hydrogen I'm interested in is hydrogen produced from renewable energy. I'm not interested in any other hydrogen, and the rest of it's just nonsense. And so when I talk about green hydrogen, it is only by electrolysis. It's not by any other mechanism. That is a really critical factor. We have a zero carbon certification scheme for hydrogen, green metals, so hydrogen, steel, aluminium, zinc, that we've developed. We've got our first two certifications underway now. We're working with the German government, the Austrian government, the Swedes, the Norwegians. We've got a whole bunch of state governments involved in that. And we will roll that out as fast as we can. But part of the core of when we've established that is there can't be fossil fuel involvement. We identify, for example, in parts of the supply chain while we're going through this transition, everybody has to use what we have. There's never been a transformation that hasn't used, the horses we use to build the railway lines, etc. That's inevitable, but we're going to account for it, and that will diminish over time. None of the competing fossil fuel technologies are going to diminish over time. They're going to get worse over time. So I'll close with that. There's plenty of opportunities. The political sway is on our side because the economics are now on our side well and truly. What I'm hoping for, I love the idea of a global carbon price, but I think that's a hard battle, but I'm supportive of it. So thank you all. I'm happy to answer questions later.
Thank you, Steve. Very good comments as well, to bring a little bit of highlights for an international and also the Australian specific perspective on the topics. Now, let me also share the floor with Jennifer Mcintosh, Executive Secretary from the International Solar Energy Society. Welcome, Jennifer, and we are looking forward to your highlights.
Thank you, Rodrigo, and thank you to the Global Solar Council for inviting us to be a part of the panel today. I represent the International Solar Energy Society. We are a global organization representing members in over 110 countries, individual and corporate members. It has been our mission and sort of our vision is to reach 100% renewable energy for all, use efficiently and wisely. We are also a UN accredited NGO, and we play a role. We see our role as being a key advocate in spreading knowledge about renewable energies and promoting and advancing the science and the education and publications to and the information sharing to make that possible. I think the previous speakers have already touched on a lot of really important points that I would like to emphasize. And for example, education. We see education as it's a way to open doors, and it's a way to create jobs. It's a way to advance the industries. We have to create the skills, educate people and have them have the right skill set to take on this challenge as well. Not just the technical skills, but there's also other solar enabling industries, financial planners, for example, city planners, or financial advisors, sorry, city planners, architects. There's so many intersections between not just the industry, but a broader picture of how we can move our society to be more sustainable. We also have to start at different levels. We have to look at how to make people aware of the different opportunities in the sector, and how they can be a part of the transformation, and how they can the job opportunities that are available, and also public awareness and public education. So reaching the people who are the end use consumers in the end, not just the homeowners, but the tenants, for example, and creating more opportunities for greater stakeholder involvement of people who are maybe they don't think they play a role, but they could, especially at the local level. It's also important when we plan and we develop ideas to look at how our transformation can be just. So if we go back to the Jedi principles for those Star Wars fans, justice, equality, diversity, and inclusion. So how are we going forward and creating a just energy transformation for all? And we know that renewables can pave that way. They open up an opportunity for more equality, for more affordability, and around the world. When I look at the topic that was to be discussed today, we talked about one of the questions was bottlenecks, and I think at the global level we still see that we're not on the level playing field. We still see a huge amount of resources being pumped into fossil fuel subsidies, and while we hype the divestment movement and things like that, it's still not enough. So there still needs to be really much stronger political action, but also much more pressure from the citizens and from all areas. And of course, on the technical side, we still the technical solutions are out there, but they're also the technical challenges are going to still be there. So we need to also continue to invest in research and development, and so we can be flexible, so we can create systems that are locally responsive and locally adapt for the situation. There's no one size fits all solution, and we see on a I think a decentralized scale how we can meet our energy needs better and make it an inclusive process. So I think
Excellent, Jennifer.
Turn over to the others so we can have a discussion.
Very good points, and they are quite in synergy with many of the aspects that were brought forward from our other speakers. So thank you so much for this contribution. I will also now pass the floor to our last debater here, which is Michele Governatori, coordinator of the Scientific Committee of the Worldwide Carbon Price. Welcome, Michele, to our conversation, and looking forward to your insights.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. Just a second. I hope you can hear me well. Okay, you should also be able to see some slides from my side. If not, please tell me. I would like to just dedicate a few words to the initiative I'm cooperating with, which is Worldwide Carbon Price. Global Solar Council is a member of it, and actually Gianni is also president of it, has been recently elected president. It's quite a brand new thing, founded in Brussels beginning this year, and the aim is what you're reading here. So we would like to ease in the ways we can at an international level the adoption of an effective carbon price internationally. We are based in Europe, in Brussels, but the reach, we try to have an international reach, and I will also present to you an event which is soon to come. I don't think I need to go here about the reasons for having a carbon price, but I'd like to, in order to be consistent with the discussion so far, I would like to raise a few points. One point is the main lack in adopting carbon pricing, in my opinion, is not the fact that carbon pricing is still covering a relatively minor part of emissions. The problem is that subsidies to carbon emitting activities are still huge globally. They are, as we know, huge historically in oil exporting countries, but it's still very significant in the developed countries where the explicit carbon price is still important. So Yes, I'm staying on this slide because this is the consistent with what I'm saying. So basically, we do have, in terms of policies, in my opinion, also in developed countries, to focus on the money we are losing in directions which are not consistent with decarbonization. And speaking about 100% transition to renewables, and just speaking about power, which is not the whole picture, I understand this, but it's a very important one. Think of Italy, for example. We do have in Italy, according to the European Environmental Agency, more than 60,000 deaths a year for bad air quality in towns, 60,000. And 2/3 of emissions are on emission which cause these deaths, nitrogen oxides and other, are related to sectors which could be easily electrified. I'm speaking about transport in towns and heating systems. And we're speaking about a Mediterranean country, Italy, so a country which is totally consistent with the general use of heat pumps. Together with this, Italy and other countries are still dedicating money, for example, through the capacity markets programs, to building, not only to make sure that existing power plants which are needed to balance the grid will stay there, but also to build new ones. Well, there are a couple of studies I would like to mention. One is very recent by Carbon Trust, applied to the UK market, and according to Carbon Trust, enabling demand response plus making the new renewables is the cheapest way to decarbonize the UK electricity system. Similar conclusion comes from a study by Carbon Tracker, which also applies to Italy. So what's lacking in the policies in order to engage flexibility on the demand side? Well, one thing is giving money to fossil power plants, and not dedicating similar long-term initiatives to developing demand-side response. We know that, and I think we all know in this panel, how important is flexibility in the power system. We know that renewables are not predictable, some of them, but demand can be able to time shift load. And this potential is really huge. And it's not only batteries, which have been correctly mentioned, especially for Australia, but also in California. They are getting to figures which are very high. We're speaking about several gigawatts. But demand can become flexible, and so can counteract with respect to the relative inflexibility of renewables in other ways. There are implicit ways of storing electricity, which is, for example, using the heating systems by telecontrolling the charge. So if I'm using heat pumps to control the temperature of a space, of a building, I can easily stop it for 5 minutes, 10 minutes when there is a critical ratio between load and production, and switch it on again 10 minutes later. The potential to do so is more than enough to avoid building new power plants. So I think this is a very important point. And when we speak, and now going to the last slide, I would like to show you this one. When we speak about carbon pricing, it's not only the short-term carbon price. It's a more complex thing, which also is a medium-term one, which has to do with avoiding giving wrong signals to the economy, which is something we're still doing. Even in OECD, very, very, very progressive countries in terms of transition to renewables. Last thing I would like to do, actually two things. While you read this slide about an event which is going to happen on the 16th of July, and I hope you will visit the Worldwide Carbon Price website to keep updated and to participate to this webinar. The other thing I would like to mention is okay. Okay, I will say, sorry, carbon pricing is not just giving a short-term right price to the carbon emissions. It's only giving correct signals for the future. The last thing is this one. If we look at Spain and Italy, and we speak about policies, wrong policies into decarbonization, there is a very high concern, political concern, about high prices of electricity recently. Why this price is coming from various reasons. One reason is the ETS price, which is very high. There is the risk in Italy and Spain that the policymakers will react to that, basically putting a ceiling to the energy price. To do what? To counteract carbon pricing. This is exactly an example, in my opinion, of bad policy that we have to try to face and avoid, because I think the policymakers should do a different thing, should explain that this short-term price is just signaling that it's not from carbon sources that we can do electricity, and this is just an anticipation of the cost that we would suffer if we do not act. That in order to put this down, what you have to do is accelerating the phase out of fossils. Trying to ceiling this price would do exactly the same, would make the coal plants, for example, still in the market for a longer period. That's my intervention. I hope I was clear. I hope you will dedicate a few minutes to this webinar that you're seeing in my slides, and to see you there. Thanks a lot for having me so far.
Thank you, Michele, for your comments and contributions on this perspective of carbon pricing as a tool to support the transition as well, an important policy to be discussed and improved. Now let's discuss a few questions that can help us to further our debate. And one of these questions I want to ask the support of Stefan Singer. And it has to do about these net zero targets and goals that many countries or cities or states are now sharing as their perspectives. So, Stefan, in your view, this new movement, political movement, as we saw, for example, in the climate summit that United States promoted in the first semester, is this helping? Are we getting closer to our actual objectives with these political initiatives? And if not, what can we do?
Thank you, Rodrigo. It is not only the climate summit; it is the EU commitment. It is the Japanese, it's the Chinese, etc. It's the South Africans, Norwegians, UK, etc., etc. So let me start with from a perspective of a scientist. To go to net zero and the longer term to net negative CO2 emissions is fundamentally important to reduce our carbon legacy in the atmosphere to have a chance to meet the 1.5C survival target. Important for many developing countries and poor communities. Let's be very honest on that one. And allow for adaptation, allow for resilience building. 1.5C is not a paradox. Let's be honest. I mean, we still have climate impacts, but much less than others, higher temperatures. So we need to do that. The problem is that the word net zero, or the principle of net zero, describes the system in the planet where the emissions to the atmosphere are equaling the emissions which are drawn down into biosystems, energies, and into geological systems or biosystems. It doesn't make a difference whether we talk about 20, 30, or 40 gigatons CO2 currently being emitted to the atmosphere and theoretically in 30 years drawn down. Or you have 1 gigaton of CO2, which are residual emissions from non-abatable energy sectors or other sectors like agriculture, like forestry, and hard to debate sectors. And then you need to draw down only 1 gigaton, which is much easier. It doesn't make a difference because the point is it's a zero-sum game between this, what you emit, and this, what you draw down. That's one of the fundamental differences towards a target, towards a carbon budget. What we need as clean energy community, as solar community, as climate community, as NGOs, to say is if you approve and support a net zero target and work on that one, tell me, what does it mean for your emissions to the atmosphere? What does it mean for your deployment of renewables and energy efficiency? What does it mean for your protection of forests? Or do you bank on pie in the sky that certain things might pop up like a magic rabbit out of a head of a magician in 30 years time, and then you have the magic solutions. And if it doesn't work, we're all screwed, right? This is what the fossil fuel companies are doing. If you look at the commitments, so-called commitments, BP, Shell, Total, even Gazprom from Russia, Saudi Aramco, they suddenly discover this net zero thing as a way to survive the ongoing sale of fossil fuels, right? They might say, well, we reduce a little bit, but in the end, we can carry on. We find something somewhere, somehow, right? And that's the mistake I think politicians are doing. Either they do it on purpose or they do it, I don't know, unintentionally. But I think scientists are increasingly warning and saying no. And again, I'm saying as an NGO, we are not opposed to net zero. It needs to be defined, clarified, quantified, and qualified. What does it mean for my emission pathway? What does it mean for my trajectory towards sustainable development? What does it mean for my reduction of pollution? What does it mean for my access to electricity, to access to clean cooking for the poor population in this house? That's the point. And then if you do all that one as soon as possible, then we have a chance to do net zero in a credible, sustainable way to help us. But first of all, it's very important to go to a real zero approach, to reduce as much emissions as possible with, in our case, renewables, energy efficiency, and sustainable infrastructure to help us to do that one. And then in the end, we can talk about that one, right? What is left? But now starting with net zero as a pie in the sky allows fossil fuel companies and really go into their websites. They embrace it one in a big scale because it's not defined. And that's a problem which was emerging from the Paris Agreement. I'm not blaming my friends who had been negotiating the Paris Agreement, because at this time it was not clear that this is being misused and misled by those who want to misuse and mislead on that one. So, but we as clean energy community have a kind of responsibility to say, if you talk about net zero, what does it mean for me? And for me and in the Climate Action Network community, it means the precondition for net zero is phasing out fossil fuels and nuclear, go to 100% renewables first. And then we can talk about the other steps. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. Very good. Defining the concept, having objective targets, practical targets to avoid greenwashing or net zero washing or something similar, right? Now let's go back to Professor Suleiman. I wanted to ask you, Professor, considering that you and many of the other speakers brought the importance of education for us to get the ball moving and to get the targets working. And you also highlighted the importance of education in your talk. Let me bring a question about education to you. So what, in your perspective, need to be done to our education systems to support this effort of acting towards 100% renewable energy and climate protection? What can we practically do? I think you're muted. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay, got it. I'm very excited to hear Stefan's quest for the definition, because I think that's fundamental. In any technology, in any non-technology matters, definition is always important, first and foremost, because that will give us a boundary, a framework of where we are and what's done before and where we can go. Therefore, for moving forward, what can we do about this? So I believe that we need to intensify the sharing of this information through awareness, through education, through training, and through competency. Whilst Steve Bloom mentioned about northern climate countries having a certain mindset, and now let's not forget, most of the population are not in that region. Most of the population are elsewhere as well. And we need to outreach to these communities. We need to formulate a certain kind of approach to different types of communities through education, pending the level of status and knowledge that a community has. So in a way, we need to disseminate, we need to do outreach, but in summary, we need to adjust to the level of education systems approaching to appropriate to a certain society. Whilst liberalizing education system, we must truly democratize and liberalize it, so that the messages are sent clearly and aptly. Back to you, Rodrigo.
Excellent, Professor Suleiman. Thank you so much. So it's using knowledge, but adapting it to the local needs and the local realities. That's great contribution. Now let's bring forward, I have another question here, and I think this goes to one point that Michele mentioned. It has to do with the feasibility of renewable energy electricity targets. And I wanted also to hear the thoughts of Steve Bloom on this matter, because of the recent developments in Australia and growth in Australia, not only of renewable energy, but complementing technologies such as energy storage. And Steve also mentioned green hydrogen as supportive technologies to accelerate the use, this transformation to a 100% renewable energy and renewable electricity effort. So first, Michele, is it possible? Can we reach this goal?
Absolutely, we can. Of course, it doesn't come just because we say it. So energy policies requires a reach which is at least several years long. If we do carry on giving long-term price to fossils flexible plants, and we do not have plans to ease demand response infrastructure, reaching this will cost more and will take more time. So the answer is yes, it is possible, but policies need to be consistent. I didn't want to take more
Sorry, Michele, I lost your audio.
So sorry for this.
Yes, I can hear you now.
Very sorry. So again, I will be very quick. Sorry for this problem in the connection. The answer is yes, we can, but policies need to be consistent. Just one example. If we do carry on giving on a long-term basis money in order to build new flexible power plants fueled with fossils, and we do not this policy to build an infrastructure of demand response, that's the wrong policy, which will make this target longer to achieve and more costly. But the answer is yes, policies need to be consistent, though. I hope I was audible now. Sorry for the problem.
Thank you, Michele. Yes, you were audible. Steve, can you also jump in and bring your thoughts?
Yes, thank you, Rodrigo, and thank you, Michele and others. Look, it's interesting because Australia has also, as I said, we installed last year around 24,000 household batteries as well. So we now have around 60,000 batteries installed. We have on-grid batteries because the need obviously is to participate in the electricity market. So if you talk about the market itself, and this is just the electricity sector, we have states now with encouragement for EVs. The area that's of concern for a lot of people is that, as I said before, not only are businesses in the community ahead of a lot of the political decision making, the technology is way ahead of standards by at least 3 years. So there are a whole lot of things happening in the absence of standards, and that just means, you know, the biggest one wins or something. But there are. It's not an absence of standards, but there's no consolidated standard for the way things are happening. What is going to be really critical, and we're working very closely with regulators. We now have regulators listening, whereas up until 18 months, 2 years ago, it was very difficult to get a regulator to listen to you about energy efficiency, about demand response, about distributed energy resources, and the impact on the regulations. And one of the things that I think you've got to be really careful of, and it's a principle I'll talk about for regulation. I like it for regulation generally, but when you aside from all the battles that Stefan and others were talking about, which are small p political and out in the community, because they're really critical, because I mean, people aren't going to act if they think there's no pressure for them to act. But in terms of getting to the regulators and so on, one of the things we have here in developed countries, and to a lesser extent in developing countries as well, we're trying to swap out the engine of a moving vehicle, right? We've got the most complex systems in the world, our electricity and energy systems of various types, for manufacturing, for doing all sorts of stuff. And we're saying, swap all this out from the current fuel sources and put in the new ones. And by the way, we want it all to keep on working and not have any hiccups or things go wrong on the way through. Now, technically, that's an engineering question. And for the most part in Australia, we're managing that part okay. And I mean, it's that old story of, I remember being in Europe in 2008 and 2009, when I first met Jenny and people like that. It was, the Germans were saying 5% or 10% penetration of renewables was going to, that's the limit for the network. And this kept on jumping and jumping. The engineering isn't the hard part. It's complex and difficult. It's not the hard part. One of the things we have is that there's not a market for a lot of the stuff we do. So the markets actually that are designed for a single way, single path electricity system, and even in the gas markets, the same issues. A whole bunch of things are rising. The markets don't match what we need them to do now. And then you have rule changes proposed and changes to those markets, and they're to deal with transitional issues. So we're confronting one in Australia at the moment where there's in South Australia, they have more than 55% renewable, close to 60% renewables. And their biggest problem is the minimum demand in the middle of the day means they'd have to switch. They don't have any coal-fired plants anymore, right? They only have some gas plants, and they're really peaking plants. But the minimum demand, because of the household consumption and the rooftop solar consumption, is so low it threatens the network, right? And there are still a lot of people who, you know, 45%, 40% of the people who don't have that stuff. So that network has to keep going. But they put in place rules to fix that particular technical problem, but it's a transitional issue. We supported them and tried to work them through it. The problem here is politicians and others are seeing this and going, oh, we want to prevent all this happening, so we're going to adopt those rules. The problem is that you can fix most of these problems and you don't need those rules. So the principle I'm going to say is there ought to be a sunset clause on all these things, right? A review and sunset clause. Now, in Australia, these rules went, there's an old thing, it's an engine of a Rolls Royce and the brakes of a billy cart. You know, it takes ages to get things in place, you get the rules in place, but then if things change, and this is a constantly changing environment in every energy system, transport, engineering, you know, in terms of electricity sector as well, it's just changing all the time. So what you don't want to do is have a rules process that was based on basically irregular change and constant demand and not much, you know, in fact, reducing demand. I mean, that we've had reducing demand here. So it requires a flexibility in dealing with it, because we're trying to swap out an engine while the car's still driving down the autobahn. And so you really need to make sure that from a regulatory perspective, they understand that the engineering can happen, but you've got to set that in place. And that might only be a temporary one for a temporary phenomenon, not one that's going to be in place for even 2 years or 5 years or 10 years. And so that applies to a whole bunch of rules, because things are changing so rapidly and the adoption is so fast. EVs is going to make I think people are underestimating the EVs. EVs have a massive opportunity for the community benefit from what they have in that. I call them batteries on wheels. That's what they are. So I actually don't see much future for residential battery systems, right? There may be a 5-year market for that, maybe not even that long if EVs produce. And the reason is very simple. We park our car for 96% of the time, right? You've got an asset sitting there with a battery 4 or 5, 6 times bigger than what you'd put in your household to run your house for 3 or 4 years. You can use that battery to meet the probably 20 or 30 times of several minutes at a time during a year when the grid actually needs support from that sort of rapid response technology. Why wouldn't you use that? Now, we haven't got any mechanism at the moment for whoever invested in that for the car to get share in the benefit the community gets from using those cars. We have to educate people that this is going to make no difference at all to your capacity to get in the car and drive away. And by the way, even if it's set up to automatically help the grid, if you say, no, I'm going a long trip and I don't want any of my car being used, you just pay a bit extra, or you don't get the fee for that. You know, like, so there's a whole bunch of sort of structural things when you envisage the future that are going to be really important, because all of these will help reduce emissions on everything, reduce the vehicle emissions, or reduce everything we electrify will do that. And I'm only really talking at the moment about for individual people. We were on separate programs for the things like the aluminium smelters, where in Australia, for example, in one state, we have an aluminium smelter that's 12% of the total demand in the state, right? 12%. Now, it's actually useful in the grid. That's actually a useful tool. They wind there. Now, at the moment, they're highly inflexible. They can be made really flexible. So that can be a massive resource on the grid. There are a whole bunch of examples all over the place. Cement manufacturing, steel, aluminium, zinc, all that sort of stuff. And aside from the new technologies of producing clean hydrogen. And just to comment on that, it's really, really important that people understand. At the moment, about 65% of the hydrogen use in the world is in the oil industry. That's what it's used for, right? But if you're going to reduce emissions, the first thing you want to do with any green hydrogen, because it's going to be expensive, even if they drop the price dramatically in the sort of scales they're talking about, it's an expensive product. And it's a product where you put in 70% of the electricity and you get 30% out of hydrogen at the other end, right? Which then has losses when you use it. That hydrogen had better be used for high value applications, right? It better be used to make sure you use it. For example, and it's a really wicked problem, fertilizers. Now, we need to change the way we farm things, but large-scale agriculture and fertilizers are going to be critical, or we'll all starve, right? Fertilizers are really, really important. And at the moment, that'd be my primary place. If you're going to produce green hydrogen, that's what you'd replace it with. And other downstream chemicals that we have no other mechanism of replacing with at the moment. anyway, that's I've rabbited on too long. So
Thank you,
Rodrigo,
Steve.
may I give you, I know we're running out of time, may I give you a 1-minute short recommendation to the Global Solar Council, what would be
Sure.
politically important for you? Right, I'm not getting into technologies here because I don't think that's a debate we should have here at this point in time.
no.
I think we're coming into Glasgow. The COP26 in Glasgow is important at the end of the year in the UK. And regardless whether it's happening virtually or in person, I think it's very important. And there will be lots of debate about net zero, lots of debate about future ways and implementation and finding the so-called NDCs, the climate pledges of the countries for 2030. I think it would be very important if renewable energy and associations like the Global Solar Council, like the Global Wind Energy Association and others, I'll leave that to you guys, I can help on that one, but you would basically need to summon and find a kind of statement towards countries, towards governments and the UK host, and saying what we need is in this decade of urgency to overcome the climate crisis, to overcome the poverty crisis, to meet the SDGs. They're also due in 2030, right? We tend to forget that one. We're far away from meeting that one. You need to fix the climate policies on the national level with strong renewable energy targets and implementation provisions, right? And whatever you do nationally, that's up to you because it's subsidiarity, that's your autonomy, but the principle must be in there. Consider renewables as a fundamental component to provide sustainability, reliability, affordability, and decent livelihoods wherever you are. It's not the only way to do it. There are other policies, but this is a fundamental component. If you do that, as renewable energy associations, towards the host, towards the countries, towards the governments in Glasgow, I think you do a great thing.
Definitely, Stefan, for sure. It is part of our role as the Global Solar Council. And I'm sure that in partnership with other institutions such as the Global Wind Energy Council, to bring forward the relevance and the opportunity of renewable energies as a strategic tool to reach these goals. So this is something that we'll definitely highlight. We are planning as the Global Solar Council specific participation on COP26, as we have been doing since our foundation at COP21. And we are looking forward to this moment also, and to partnering with institutions such as yours to bring ideas forward in this regard. Before we finish, I want to give the opportunity also to Jennifer to share her thoughts on a last question, very briefly, because of our time, about which should be our priorities in your view, Jennifer, for a successful transition to a 100% renewable energy system. Where should we bet our opportunities and our money?
Well, I guess the advantage of going last is that I can just emphasize what's already been said. So I think, I think leveling the playing field, first of all, I mean, we know we have the technological solutions. We know that they work. We have the engineers and the science behind us to make the transition, even if, as Steve was saying, it's a moving vehicle. We know it's incrementally possible. We know we can change our systems. We see the political and the financial burdens, I think, or hurdles are what need to be overcome. The fact that we still have over 500 or 400 billion in fossil fuel subsidies to this day is just mind-boggling from a perspective of a society, from our perspective. I think we know there's the reasons for those. I mean, there's obviously reasons for these kind of subsidies, but there's a way out, and there's a way to levelize the playing field and to offer energy equality and justice through renewables. And I think that's the message that we're going to bring to COP. We'll be there with our partner organizations as well. We're going to talk about how we can create new momentum for climate change mitigation through the clean energy transition or the renewable energy transition. And that's our focus. But we also need to continue to focus on education, training, the next generation, how to create synergies between countries where there's lots of knowledge and there's a need for knowledge. And I think we need to continue to build on those and really keep the pressure up through synergies of organizations like the Global Solar Council, where ICES is represented, and our national and regional partners. So thank you for the opportunity to say that, and I hope we can continue the discussion and see some action. And yeah, it's good to hear all the interesting things that are going on at the national and regional level. So
excellent, Jennifer. Thank you for your contribution. I would like to thank all the panelists today for the fruitful discussion, very interesting aspects brought forward. I would say we have a lot of work ahead of us, but also the opportunities on this year to bring some of these ideas into action and make the change grow. Unfortunately, our time is up. I also want to thank all the audience that we had today for this event, and also want to thank the Global Solar Council for the event and for the invitation for us to participate and the opportunity to moderate this session. Now we will have additional sessions taking place. So maybe the team can share the screen with information about next sessions, so our viewers and our audience can get prepared. Yes, thank you. So we have another panel discussion coming into place about policy measures to address barriers and increase large-scale as well as distributed systems in installations both in developed and developing countries. This is taking place at 3 p.m. CEST. Is there another one as well? And at 3:50 p.m. CEST, a panel discussion on best practices in financing mechanisms and achieving a level playing field with fossil fuels. So allow me to invite you to join the conversation on these next sessions. And now also to thank all participants from today's session: Stefan Singer, Senior Climate Science and Global Energy Policy Advisor from the Climate Action Network International, Professor Suleiman Shari, Secretary General of the Asian Photovoltaic Industry Association, Steve Bloom, President of the Smart Energy Council of Australia, Jennifer Mcintosh, Executive Secretary from the International Solar Energy Society, and Michele Governatori, Coordinator of the Scientific Committee of the Worldwide Carbon Price. My name is Rodrigo Sawaya, CEO of the Brazilian Photovoltaic Solar Energy Association, co-chairman of the Global Solar Council, and it was my pleasure to moderate this debate with you all today. Thank you for your attention, and we look forward to seeing you on the next session.